Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. You know, I'm at a space in my own leadership development where I still learn information from reading and having meaningful conversations and watching films and documentary. But I'm also understanding that I learn a lot through my own reflections. You know, our formal educational process calls for us to read the poems, the novels, the theories, postulates of people who lived 50, 100, 200 years ago. But it's interesting that the older I become, reflecting on my actions, reflecting on my lack of actions, mistakes, successes, allows me to learn as much internally as I have or as I do from external sources. So I want to reflect a little bit today because I think it's important. So this last weekend was a big one for me, really important. Friday night was my 33rd wedding anniversary. Jackie and I were married June 18th, 1988. We met in college. We're friends for a couple of years. A mutual friend introduced us, and we were good friends for years before we realized we really were in love with each other. So we have a tradition because we typically vacation later in summer, and so we play hooky on our birthdays and on our anniversary. Often we'll do a staycation unless it's a major or significant anniversary. And that can be fun for us because we rediscover our city and do things that we might not normally do, you know, like eat at certain places or stay certain places. So it's just fun. I would just say that I'm a very public person, private in my emotions and affairs, but publicly recognized. And my wife is an introvert, and the idea of being out in public and being recognized is not enjoyable to her at all. But I will say, although I'm recognized for being a thought leader, a creative organizations, a social entrepreneur, she has worked behind the scenes because she's very focused on details. She's an administrator. She's a financial professional. And so it's just been a really good partnership. Now, the first 10, 15 years, we almost killed each other because I'm a visionary and I don't want to think about the whatabouts. And she is a very detailed person, and all she thinks about, and I'm sure it's not all, I know the detailed people are thinking, oh, I can't believe he said that. But she thinks a lot about, well, the whatabouts or the howabouts, or have you considered? It's taken us a while to learn how to really appreciate that both components, and there are other perspectives as well, but both of those are very important. That if a vision or a concept is going to happen, you do have to think about the whatabouts, equipment and space and teams and resources and permits. And so part of what has strengthened our relationship is that we've learned our strengths and our flat sides, our opportunities. And I think that has helped us a lot. Another thing that I think is very important, and I treasure this after 33 years of marriage, we're still friends. Now, we have a relationship, we're romantic, we love each other, but it's so nice that we can still laugh at things, that I still find things that she says funny, that she still finds things that I say funny, that we find out that we still think that what we think is interesting, that each other's families are important to us. I'll come home sometimes and she will have been talking to my niece or my cousin, or her nephews will call me on my birthday and she'll say, "What? These are her sister's children. Well, they didn't call me on my birthday." And so I love the fact that we share family. We're fortunate that both of our mothers are still living, and she is so respectful and loving of my mom. And I am very loving and supportive of her mother-in-law, of my mother-in-law, her mom. And so just want to just say a shout out. I'm often talking about issues and topics, but I want to remind people that there are things that we hold in common, and that everything in my life is not about race or racial strife. That this weekend I celebrated a very important wedding anniversary. And so happy anniversary, Jackie. Sunday is Father's Day, and I love Father's Day. People think, well, of course you do. You're a dad, you're a father. And yes, that's why I love Father's Day. But also from a very young age, I had dreams of becoming a dad. My parents separated when I was very young and divorced when I was young. I'm a junior. I'm named after my father. And I don't really remember my parents ever being together. Mom was very diligent in making sure that I got to see my father. And even when we moved to Madison, which was about 150 miles, 3 hours from Chicago, Mom would make sure that I saw my father, even when he did not take it upon himself to really do his part to keep up with me. But as a kid, I longed for that relationship with him. I didn't know that it was driving me. I didn't realize that it pushed me in so many ways. Much of my work in the community has been shaped by the residual impact of fatherlessness. It was the focus of my doctoral dissertation, the impact of fatherlessness on Black males. So it's something that I've thought about, and it's something that I've helped men with, not just Black men, but men with, because fatherlessness has different categories. There's a situation like mine where my parents were married. I knew my father because I interacted with him, but he was not physically or emotionally in my life. But I had friends or people who I've interacted with professionally, whose fathers lived with them physically, but the fathers were emotionally distant or emotionally abusive. I found that some of those folks had greater scars than I did, not really growing up with my father. And then there are those who've never met their fathers and refer to them perhaps as sperm donors, where they know their father's name, but the fathers have never sought them out. Their mothers have never given them a lot of information. It may have been a one-night stand. And so there are just several levels of that. And then to compound on fatherlessness as it has materialized itself in the Black community. And let me just say this. I'm reflecting. So this is not a rant. I'm just reflecting. When I talk about fatherlessness, I don't just mean the status of your home. That even though my biological father was not in my home, I had mentors, I had coaches, I had pastors, I had uncles. So I watched people be committed to marriage. I watched people take care of sick and ill spouses. I had people who encouraged me in school, and so I had those figures. I had cousins. Because of mass incarceration and just many of the assaults in the Black community and the struggles within the Black community and bad choices within the Black community, the dads and the uncles and the grandpas are often not around either. I mean, think about it. If you don't know your father, you probably don't know your grandfather. So if my dad was not in my life, my dad's dad sure as heck wasn't in my life. And so it often has at least a 2-generational impact. And my uncles, his brothers, weren't in my life either. And so when I talk about the impact of fatherlessness, the state of fatherlessness, I don't just mean the lack of a dad in that nuclear family inside that house, but because if his brothers and if his dad and if his friends were a part of that, it could somehow compensate. I have children in our congregation, nieces and nephews, who may not have their physical fathers in their home, but they have me in their life and their lives, but also my friends and colleagues, folks who have chosen to do life together. And so we remember birthdays. And when someone turns 18 or 21, we celebrate successes. And so even though the dads may not be in the home, and there's still a wound from that case of missing the dad, but the deep sense of fatherlessness, where there are no father figures, has been removed mainly for a lot of my close circles and for folks, in my family. And so that's just an interesting way of looking at fatherhood. So it's been very important to me because of its impact on my life. Another thing that's important to me about fatherhood, and I don't often talk about this on the podcast, but my wife and I lost two daughters to premature birth. In 92 and in 93, we gave birth. My wife gave birth to a daughter in each of those years, who were live births, but they were not old enough or developed enough to be able to live. And that was just horrific. Put me in a tailspin towards depression for years, because it released and unearthed all of the other pains of fatherlessness that I had endured. And so when Lexi, my 24-year-old, our only child, was born, she was premature. My wife went into labor on Thanksgiving Day and wasn't due until the middle or end of March. And so Lexi was due in spring of 97, and she came to us Thanksgiving weekend in 96. She had a 116-day stay in an incubator at a local hospital here in Madison, SSM, who took great care of my daughter. And she's healthy. Thank God she's healthy and strong and brilliant and beautiful. And so Father's Day is a gift, because her presence brings healing. Because if you haven't had a father, being one can really be redemptive. And I love being a father, but more importantly, I really love being her father. So it was a good Father's Day. I feel like I had to give a gift to her and my wife, because my wife hung in there and was willing to try again for a child when all the odds were against us. And so Father's Day is very spiritual, it's very emotional, it's very cultural, it's very centering. And although I receive gifts, I feel like I need to give gifts to Jackie and Lexi, because Jackie certainly fought to carry Lexi, knew that she was high risk. And it seemed like Lexi knew how important she was to us, because she fought. Like, as a newborn, 1.5 pounds, she pulled the breathing tube out of her throat. I'm talking like an hour after birth. The doctor came out of the neonatal intensive care unit. We call it the NICU. He came out and said, "Your daughter just pulled the breathing tube out of her mouth." He said, "We had to put it back in. We watched in case baby was trying to tell us something, but she couldn't breathe on her own, so we put it back in." And so it's almost as if she knew how important it was to me. So I'm so grateful for Father's Day. Now, smack dab in the middle of this celebration of our anniversary on Friday and Father's Day on Sunday was June 19th, which is Juneteenth. The Juneteenth celebration. And that's what I really want to spend the bulk of my time of reflection on. Juneteenth. And so if you've been following the news, you know that Juneteenth has just become a federal holiday. So I think that means we're going to get the day off. The last federal holiday was set, I think, about 40 years ago, and it was the MLK Day, the King Day. And so 40 years since we've named a federal holiday. So that's pretty amazing. And so let me just reflect for a little bit, because I'm sure some of you are thinking, man, okay, so you have mixed feelings, Dr. G. Like, are Black people ever satisfied? Well, yes, I am. This one Black person is, but with true progress. But sometimes things are smoke and mirrors, and we have to just look really deeply to figure out what's really going on. All right, for those of you who don't know, and I'll put a couple of links in here that explains Juneteenth, but basically, June 19th, 1865, news had reached the yet enslaved black people in the state of Texas, in Galveston, Texas, received word that slaves had been freed. Even though 3 million black folks had been freed by Lincoln's proclamation, by Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, the news hadn't reached, and Lincoln did that in 63, 100 years before my birth. That's how I remember it. I was born in 1963. But news didn't reach the last group of enslaved people in Texas until June of 1865, about 2.5 years later. So this brings up a lot of questions. What happened? Was mail that slow? We know we didn't have social media, but why would it take 2.5 years to get that message to the slaves? Did Texas just put up a big wall on the border, not let news get in? Like, what was really going on? First of all, let me just say a couple of things that's really interesting, and as I begin to reflect, it'll help you to understand why I want to dig more deeply to make sure that we fully celebrate Juneteenth and not just add another day where we can take off or work from home or close our doors so that we don't have customers or clients while we, continue with our workaholism. But I want it to be a time that really moves us ahead together. All right, so slaves had gotten word and were freed immediately. But just a couple things just to straighten out. So the Emancipation Proclamation that President Lincoln spoke, created, declared, penned, wasn't designed to free all slaves. And Google this. This is not just, me as a black person just spewing propaganda. If you look at the original version, he being President Lincoln, wrote a draft of the proclamation of the, I keep saying the order wrong. I'm sorry, of the Emancipation Proclamation. He wrote a draft in September of 62 because some of his cabinet members said, don't do it too precipitously because it'll look to the Confederate like you're conceding or you're losing. And so he wrote a draft that basically said to the Confederates, if you rebels don't stop rebelling and do not return to the Union. Remember, because some of the southern states seceded or left the Union because they wanted to hold slaves. He said, if you don't return to the United States, we're going to free your slaves. Read the document. Read it. Lincoln did not sit down and say, we're going to free slaves. He had a moral quandary over it because as he read it, it seemed like the Constitution might leave that responsibility to the states, thereby not giving the federal government or its chief executive, the president, the authority to abolish slavery. And so he was wrestling with it. His proclamation was not to say, damn it, it is time for all black people to be free in this here country. That's not what he said. Because let me tell you what was happening. Black people were being used by the South, and this should not be surprising to anyone else because we were used for labor, we were used for sex, we were used for breeding future slaves. And so we were used. So the Southern soldiers, the Confederate soldiers, used slaves to dig trenches, to set ambush, to help take care of the troops, to prepare food. And so the slaves stopped picking cotton to help fight against the North for their own freedom. Black people were employed to not only make white people rich by picking cotton and other crops, we were being used by the Confederates to fight against our emancipators. Well, President Lincoln saw that and thought, all right, so now we're not just fighting against white men. They have now employed hundreds of thousands of their slaves to fight against us. So in order to beat them at their own game, President Lincoln penned, and Google this, I think the date was September 22nd, 1862. Lincoln wrote, if you do not return to the Union, come to your senses, we will free your slaves. So it was actually a threat. And it was not this great day of where our president had come to our aid. Now, listen to me. As my grandmother used to say, listen at me. What makes black people and other people of color just so suspicious of when something is seemingly good. And this is sad because we do want to see the silver lining. We do. Listen, black people deserve a happy day. We deserve a weekend. We deserve a payday. We deserve it. So it's not fun thinking, well, what's really behind it? What's behind your back? Why is that other hand behind your back? We ask these questions because nothing has ever been as it has truly appeared. Nothing has really been that way when it's come to emancipation. And then freeing slaves is one thing. Abolitionists who just believed in dismantling the system that created slavery and the system that the second class citizenship. Abolitionists wanted to break the systemic residual effects of slavery and give people true access. So it's not just slavery is over, but you can't just disenfranchise people for a couple of hundred years and just say, as you were. Well, as I was in Africa, living with my family, eating off the land and telling stories and being a part of a rich heritage. So you're going to free me where I had the protection of my slave owners because I was his property. Now I'm his competition, and anyone can lynch me, shoot me, kill me, threaten my wife, threaten my kids. And so it's like letting everybody out of prison with no jobs, no housing, no food, no training, no counseling, no treatment, no medicine, no transportation. Just like, boom, you're out. Now, I'm not saying slaves were dangerous, but what I'm saying was they were ill prepared to function because who's going to sell them land and who's going to sell them seed and who's going to give them loans? So it's just very troubling time. However, things began to snowball. So because I guess people didn't understand Lincoln's proclamation, slaves started getting freed. And so it did not get to Galveston, Texas until 1865. Now, what's really interesting is that even though Lincoln had written this Emancipation Proclamation in 63, the 13th Amendment was not penned until 1865. It was not ratified until December of later that year. So it was introduced in January of 65, and then it was ratified in December of 65. And smack dab in the middle of that process, word gets to people in Galveston. And so by the time the slaves in Galveston or the people of Texas got the message, this was actually in the process of becoming law, an actual amendment to the Constitution and abolishing slavery. Now, interestingly enough, it was the first time the word slavery, I believe, was mentioned in the Constitution. So the Constitution stayed intact, but the 13th and eventually the 14th and the 15th Amendments were added. But the 13th Amendment freed slaves, offering them citizenship. Now, as I'm reflecting upon this, here's what I want you to look at with me. The definition of citizenship is the state of being vested with the rights, privileges, and duties of a citizen. The state of being vested with rights, privileges, and duties of a citizen. Vested is one of those interesting words because we kind of know, we sort of understand what invested means, but what does vested mean? I'll put it this way. If you start a new company and you participate in its retirement plan, you may contribute, but they may tell you you're not fully vested until 5 years, which means if you quit up until the 4 years, you have not put enough money in the plan to be able to reap the benefits. For example, in my company, you're vested after 5 years of contributions, at which time, if you leave, you will receive a dividend for the rest of your life. Now, it would be larger if you stayed longer, but when you are vested, that means you have put enough in that you will benefit. Many of us as Black people feel some level of vestment, but do not feel fully vested in the rights, the privileges, and the duties of a citizen. Now, this is what was ratified in December of 1865 of the 13th Amendment. Also stating that slavery shall be illegal except in cases of incarceration. That's a whole nother, now that one will be a rant. That will not be a reflection. That's a rant. Basically it's saying that if you are in prison, then you can be enslaved and you can work for free. Which may make sense if you kill someone or rape someone and you admit it and it really happened. But we know that there's so many people in prison who didn't perform heinous crimes. They might have had untreated mental health issues and used drugs and what have you. And they can become slaves and property of the state. And anyway, like I said, we'll go over that another time. And so let me just go a little bit further in talking about Juneteenth, because I want our listeners to understand this so that you're not just getting your information on the news, but you're talking to someone who studied it, who's lived it. My nonprofit used to sponsor Juneteenth celebration in Madison, Wisconsin, one of the oldest ongoing Juneteenth celebrations, in the nation. But keep this in mind. We're celebrating what's happened that slaves were finally freed in 1865, but keep this in mind. Crispus Attucks, a black man, was killed during the Boston Massacre, during the American Revolution. I'm just trying to show you how far back black patriotism goes and black nationalism goes and commitment to this country goes. It sounded funny saying black nationalism, but you know what I meant. 186,000, they were called colored troops, and 20,000 colored sailors fought and died for freedom during the Civil War. You add that together, that's 200,000 people, black, who fought and died during the civil right for their own freedom, which they believe would help all of America. And then, you look at the Tuskegee Airmen and the Buffalo Soldiers and the Montfort Point Marines. Black people have been militarily involved in this nation since there were wars in this country, in recent history, going back to the American Revolution, World War I, World War II. My grandfather was part of World War II. My uncles went overseas in the military. And so what's interesting is we're talking about giving rights to people who had already fought for the rights of this country, but were alienated and not given true citizenship. And so even though the 13th Amendment came, and this was really the era where this, right in the middle of the ratification of the 13th Amendment, is when Juneteenth took place. But we were promised citizenship. Yet, when we wrote about lynching in our newspapers, we were threatened to be killed. That's not what you do to citizens. And when our businesses were more profitable than our white counterparts, we were killed. That shouldn't be what happens to citizens. What happened to being invested in the privileges and the opportunities of what it means to be a citizen? So what I'm struggling with as I think about Juneteenth and its celebration is, one, it is beautiful. We want to commemorate it. But I want to know, why did it take so long? Because Texas was trying to get one or two more crops out before black people were freed? And then when I consider Lincoln's true intent, or the quandary in which he found himself, his moral dilemma as to how do you deal with slavery. But again, his intent for that proclamation was not born out of love for black people. I mean, let me just say this. I want you to hear this really well, white people. Most white people during the height of slavery probably struggled somewhat on a moral level about its appropriateness, the beatings, and that's why they had to convince themselves we were not really a human. We didn't really feel pain. We were like naughty children. We needed to be corrected with the whip. And so there were head trips and things that white people did to themselves, but most of them struggled with it because there's a part of us as humans on a very deep, deep level who might benefit from subjugating or subjecting others to cruel work environments and cruel punishment. But you have to be sick to not be affected by it. So there are many people who thought that was wrong, but it was so lucrative that people did not want to dismantle it. They just didn't want to dismantle it. And so because it would mean losing jobs, because slavery didn't just impact the backwoods redneck farmer, Massa Thomas in some county in Mississippi, but it impacted the rail and trains and transportation and banking and insurance and the financial world. Black people were used for collateral and stored underneath Wall Street. I mean, you guys, it was deep. And most of us don't know this. We just think, well, yeah, it's kind of like indentured servants, right? Like you work really hard and then you get freed. But because we don't know the history, we can't fully celebrate the progress or hold us accountable for progress.
Hi, this is Amy from Eugene, Oregon. I listen to Black Like Me because I want to hear different perspectives and push myself out of my comfort zone as a white person. I support the podcast as a Patreon because it's an awesome show and I know it takes a ton of work and effort to make it all happen.
Hey, what's up, Black Like Me family? We are celebrating the 5th year of this award-winning podcast, Black Like Me. It now has a reach throughout the U.S. and in over 100 countries around the world. This podcast is changing the conversation about race in America. By going to patreon.com/Black Like Me and signing up at any of the levels offered, you are not only signing up to make a monthly donation, you are also helping to create better content and, more importantly, joining a growing community of people interested in engaging the issue of race with a raw, unprecedented honesty and creating a better society. And as a patron of the podcast, you'll have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, and video chats with Dr. G. You will also have a chance to join the conversation that other patrons are already having with Dr. G about race in America. So to become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/Black Like Me or see the link in our show notes. And for as little as $2, you can support these important conversations and the work that Dr. G is doing. Thank you in advance.
And so this brings me up to my current point. I'm glad that Juneteenth is a federal day because it gives us a chance to remember. But as I was reading an article in the Atlantic by Kelly Carter Jackson, I love this article that Kelly wrote, and Kelly's a historian, but Kelly's talking about the importance of Juneteenth and gives some good background. But Kelly also goes on to say, or Dr. Carter Jackson goes on to say, there's a difference between memory and history. History is irrefutable. It happened. There are dates, names, places, and people. It happened. Slavery happened. Women's suffrage happened. The annihilation of Native Americans happened. But many times our holidays are tied to memories, and memories, as we know, can be selective. In your own family, some people remember that, well, Uncle Johnny was just really good to us, but others remember, no, Uncle Johnny used to drink and used to say inappropriate things and do inappropriate things when he was drinking. And so you might choose to remember that he gave us $20 on our birthdays, but I remember other things that he did. And so we can have selective memories, and sometimes our holidays are like that. For example, we will celebrate King's Day and we'll have all of these Martin Luther King Jr. celebrations without adhering to the principles that he lived and died for. And so banks and companies will close their doors, but not think critically about how they diversify or make sure that Black people are hired in their industry, not just their company, their industry. 100 years ago, we recognized the Tulsa Massacre, and it was just the destruction, it really was, it was domestic terrorism. Black businesses, Black wealth was destroyed, but Black art and coffee houses and playhouses and bookstores, art and culture and businesses were destroyed. And so but because we don't know history, we didn't understand the symbolism of when Donald Trump wanted to have a meeting. I'm trying to remember. I don't think he had. I think his folks told him not to do it. But he wanted to talk about an economic plan for America from Tulsa. Now, his people knew that that's where black wealth in a concentrated manner was just obliterated in America. But the symbolism of standing there was like going to sacred Native American grounds and talk about our discovery of America. Just to go to this place where mass graves and mass destruction and proclaim an economic plan for the United States, knowing that black people are still reeling, not just from Tulsa, but Tulsa-like activities when we were systematically, categorically kept from really enjoying the wealth that we had created. And in the case of Tulsa, it wasn't just creating it on Massa's plantation. These black people were free and bought land and built facilities and established business and transacted business and created wealth in order to create something very beautiful out of the ashes, designed by black people. And somebody said, "Oh no, we're not going to do this." And out of some lies or some emotional decoys, ended up just leveling this place. To this day, nothing like it exists. There's black wealth, but Oprah, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Steph Curry, they live in their gated communities. We do well. But back in Tulsa, a black farmer's daughter could go to school with a black millionaire's daughter. The preacher's daughters and the janitor's daughters could go to school with the college president's daughters. And you could see it all. And you didn't just have a concentration of poverty in classrooms and space. It was beautiful, and it meant that we could be philanthropic, and people brought that wealth to the churches, and which meant that you could grow your programs and your ministry and your services to the community. And with wealth goes, so does say so. So does say so. So as we celebrate Juneteenth, and I think we should, we can't allow another, and this is to quote Kelly Carter Jackson, we can't just have another day for barbecuing and sending postcards and having eat out, cookouts without looking at what's really happening around us. So what's the economic plan for Black America? Does the Juneteenth day talk about that? Is there a summit? Are we going to find a way to rebuild this? Are there plans for loans and redistricting? Gentrification is running rampant in communities that were traditionally lived in by people of color. Are we talking about it? And voter suppression? Voter suppression? Can we talk about voter suppression? That's happening. Rules and laws to make it tricky and difficult. I live in the state of Wisconsin. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, places where there were probably 180 polling places. Because of COVID, the governor was just afraid that people would either not vote or get sick or get others sick voting, and just proposed to move the voting date, the ballot date, the voting date. It went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, struck it down, said, nope, you cannot change that date. And so the city of Milwaukee had to scramble. And rather than having 180 polling places, they had less than 10. I want to say 8, but to be safe, I'll say less than 10 in the height of COVID. So, people got sick. People gave COVID and got COVID because they wanted to vote. Black people wanted to vote in the face of COVID in Milwaukee and its inner cities. 8 polling places. I was talking to one of my colleagues, a cousin, and she said she's been in her car waiting to vote for 3 hours. I remember it was 8:00, and we said, "Well, are they going to still let you in? Are the polls closing?" She said, "Well, we're told that if we were in line, we will be able to still vote." And they weren't bringing ballots over to the cars. When it was your turn, they show you where to park. You have to get out and then walk into this place where you have to still stand and wait to vote. This is my home state of Wisconsin. And so I'm all for celebrating Juneteenth, but let's really celebrate Juneteenth. Let's celebrate the 13th Amendment that promises, that assures citizenship of black people. Well, citizens shouldn't have to get COVID to vote. Citizens shouldn't have to die to vote. Citizens should be able to vote for representatives who reflect their values and, yes, their culture and their interest and their dreams and the dreams of children. And so while we're getting happy that we're celebrating Juneteenth, and I'm not negative about it, but if you remember, the theme for my podcast for this season, season 5, is now what? Because I'm afraid that excited and excitable black people and white people who just want this to be over will think Obama, Kamala Harris, Juneteenth Day, we are finally making progress. And when you consider it from a representative perspective, yes. But don't forget, on plantations, there were one or two or a few slaves who were allowed to be inside, where it was a little cooler, where it certainly was a lot more shade. And maybe their task was shaving and cooking and taking care of babies and not working cotton fields with the snakes and all the other kinds of bugs and heat and all of those things. But just because they were in the house, they still served a purpose. It didn't mean that they had liberty. They were raped in the house like they were raped in the cabins, like they were raped in the field. They were beaten in the houses like they were beaten in the cabins, like they were beaten in the fields. Am I saying what? Kamala Harris and President Obama are house slaves? No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm not making that analogy. What I'm saying is, just because someone is profiled, just because others make it, doesn't mean that the battle is over, that the struggle is over. That's what I'm saying. So to my friends who are looking at what's happening in terms of Juneteenth, it is great that we are recognizing it. But remember, history and memory is different. So while we commemorate Juneteenth, can we also talk about that proclamation led to the eventual abolition of slavery, even though that was not necessarily the intention of the president? And can we look at the history that it took 2.5 years? So even though it was becoming legalized, the slave owners didn't tell the full truth because slavery was too lucrative. That hasn't changed, people. Laws are taking so long. Okay, so we've been fighting to have Juneteenth as a day. And again, sometimes when we talk honestly like this, people say, well, damn, are black people ever satisfied? Black people have questions because we've seen too much. We've seen a lot. And so we've been fighting for this for about 100 years. So why does it become a federal holiday now? George Floyd, maybe because of Breonna Taylor, maybe because of Ahmaud Arbery. Now, listen, we don't want their deaths to be in vain, and we want good to come out of it. So stay with me. I'm glad that good comes, but I want it to be great and not just good. And so if we're going to name a day Juneteenth, then let's also look at laws that make sure that everyone is policed. Everyone who has citizenship are policed equally and fairly, that we all have access to jobs and housing and wealth and good education, that I don't want to just sing happy birthday at someone's party and not get cake because I'm black. If I'm going to be invited and if I'm going to be singing and wearing a party hat, then give me some cake. But don't invite me to the party and I'm wearing a hat and blowing the party favors and I'm singing and then I'm asked to clean up. I want the full effect and the full benefit of what all the other friends, all the other neighbors, all the other kids have. And so as we're celebrating Juneteenth, I think it is a great thing. But let's not be selective with our memories. Let's really lean into history and understand that while all of this is going on, black people were escaping from the South to the North and fighting against the South for their own freedom. So while we're talking about Lincoln's proclamation that really didn't have teeth, and that the final 13th Amendment was introduced in January and voted on in January of 1865. It wasn't ratified until December, almost a year later. Why does it take so long to give citizens their due citizenship? What's so hard about seeing the humanity of all people? What's so hard about recognizing the black people who have fought for this country? They didn't fight for black America because there was no black America. There was free America, and then there were other people. But they fought because they believed in the ideals. And they didn't fight so they could go back to Africa, because for folks born on American soil, this was their home. They fought for America. And today, that's what people want. They want true citizenship. Can I have due process under the law? Can we still get loans without redlining? Can we walk down the street and not be harassed or bullied or threatened or killed? And so I'm glad that we're celebrating things that had not been celebrated, like Juneteenth. But Juneteenth, to me, is not the answer to the issues. If we celebrate Juneteenth, let's look at the conditions of 1863 through 65 and ask, if the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment grant citizenship, due process, and the ability to vote, why are people messing with that vote 150 years later? Why was there a Voter Registration Act 100 years after the 13th Amendment? Why did it take 2.5 years? Why did it take 100 years? Why is it taking 150 years? When white people want stuff, y'all want it right away. Black people are always told to wait, be patient, it's coming in the morning time. We want stuff now because we aren't superhuman and we won't live forever in this realm. And so we want what our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have not only dreamed of and hoped for, but fought for. We want citizenship. And let me just tell you something else, that while we're celebrating Juneteenth, there's a real threat among white political leaders, more conservatives. I'm not trying to get into party lines or Republicans. There's this infatuation with this critical race theory that they don't want children's self-esteem marred by showing that 150 years ago, folks who look like them used to beat slaves, rape slaves, kill slaves, sell their babies, and then tell you to go nurse my baby. Your heart is broken because we just stole your baby and sold it because we can get money for good, black females. But while your breasts are still filled with milk for your own baby, you're being forced to nurse the enemy's baby. It just makes my soul hurt when I think about that. And we endure it and still want to be friends and still want to be American and still want to believe in the ideals of this country. So if we're going to celebrate Juneteenth, let's look at Juneteenth and ask, have we really made a lot of progress? And what does it take to make progress? I don't want people to get stuck, but we are stuck. I want people to get unstuck. So people are threatening history because they think it divides us. No. Slavery, systemic racism has divided us. The haves and the have-nots, the blacks and the whites and the non-whites. No, you did that with redlining. And I don't mean you individually. I mean you, the man, you, the system. You did that with voter suppression. You did that with domestic terrorism. You did that with lynching. You created too. And now when we talk about it, now when we bring it up, it's destructive. Trump was talking about defunding organizations that taught history that way. There's now a push in the state of Wisconsin to change how we teach history. Wait a minute. We're about to change the way we teach history. Wake up call. Hey, here's a point. We never taught history. We never taught history. It just wasn't put in the books. And now that it's in the books and white people are talking about it because black people are talking about it, now white people are listening. Now there are Republicans that are trying to change the way we teach it. Because let me tell you something. History should be irrefutable. And if you are making plans to erase it, you are sure as hell planning to repeat it. Come on, don't play with me. If you're trying to suppress and erase history, we used to say, well, we must understand history lest we repeat it. If you are trying to erase history, you are planning on repeating it. And so if you are suppressing votes and you want to erase the fact that that has already happened, let me tell you something. Let me just tell you something. This is just a little amateur historian in me. My undergraduate degree was in history. Black people were elected to Congress at the turn of the 20th century. Philip Dray, D-R-A-Y, wrote a book called Capital Men. Some of these were freed slaves, but 16 men in the U.S. Capitol, in the Congress, 16, scared the crap out of white people. Hence the introduction of tests at the polls, because black people were voting, and they were voting for black in southern states, in Mississippi and Virginia. And because some of the states had seceded, they couldn't vote. And so The Birth of a Nation, that movie, was created and scaring white people. So can you read the whole idea of a grandfather clause? Did your grandfather vote? Well, then hell, you can't vote. Did your grandfather vote? Yes, sir. Yes, he did. All right, then you come on in here and vote. They start putting up all these kinds of laws and things to stop black progress. Well, if that's never in the history books, then what's happening now doesn't look diabolical. The only reason we know what these folks are doing is because they've done it before. Not they, the party, but they, the people, have done it before. So if we're going to celebrate Juneteenth, then you got to also read up on voter suppression. You can't just go and eat barbecue in June and not understand that it's important that we all have representation, that we all take advantage of that mighty vote. And if we're going to celebrate, let's not celebrate our memories. Let's celebrate our progress, and let's learn from history and do better. 5 things I just want you to think about as you continue to process the Juneteenth celebration. 1, participate in cultural celebrations because they're good. It's not the end. But I want you to celebrate when it's Cinco de Mayo or other cultural celebrations that's celebrating the ethnic and the cultural identities. And can I say something? Because I'm tired of this ignorance being written on my Facebook page. Well, what if we celebrated being white? First of all, your culture is not white. Go back and read your great-grandfather's diaries, and he's not going to say, or your great-great-grandmother, that we're just celebrating white culture. They're going to say we're very proud to be of Polish descent, Irish descent, proud Germans. We're French. We're Norwegian. We are from Norway. We are from any place you pick it. There was lots of pride, and it influenced worship and food and dress. All of these things. The Netherlands. It was all shaped. So there's no such thing as white culture in terms of white ethnicity. Because Europe is not just some great melting pot. The French didn't confuse themselves with the Germans. They didn't confuse themselves with the Polish or the Czechs. They didn't confuse themselves. And so celebrate and find out your culture. I've got a staff member. He's Polish and British and Irish, and he's learning to celebrate those things. I'm not going to say you're a racist celebrating being Irish. That's stupid. But because black people know that white is not an ethnicity, no, we don't want you to celebrate whiteness because what are you going to do? Wear KKK robes? You're going to bring a cross with you and burn it? You're going to bring a whip with you? White culture was created to suppress black people and to create a power system that would benefit those of European descent. So no, let's not celebrate that, all right? Let's do something different. So celebrate your cultures, but learn to celebrate cultures that are not your own, because we have not told you not to celebrate your culture. We just say get to know your culture, because You've been robbed if you think your ethnic culture is white. You've been robbed. So do your own homework. Secondly, know history and not just the celebrations. So if you're going to go to Cinco de Mayo, what is Cinco de Mayo? Don't just go there and come home and say, oh, we have some great food. No, find out what it is. Find out what it is. Black people are reading. We got the internet. The reason why white people are getting so mad when we talk about the 4th of July or the Star Spangled Banner, because we're looking at some of the lines in these things and we're thinking that's really supporting suppression. And so don't get mad at us for being smart. Is that why y'all didn't want us to read? So that we wouldn't know the truth? The truth will make you free. And so know history and not just the cultural celebrations. Everyone doesn't feel the same way on the 4th of July, but it doesn't mean that we don't love America. It means make America lovable for us too. Can we live and not get shot? Can we live and have free? Can we live and have access? Can we challenge the way Americans challenged at the American Revolution and the Boston Massacre, World War I? Can we just challenge the status quo without being seen as Marxist or communist or anti-American? Because we have been in this country more than most of our counterparts, and we're still clawing away at trying to enjoy citizenship. So know history and help to preserve it. When you hear about people taking this critical race theory, we're going to take it out of our schools. Don't just come to Juneteenth and get your hair braided. And then you don't speak up when they're trying to take true history out. Because what's going to happen is you're going to be dead and where you going. And your children are going to be perpetuating this stuff because you didn't speak up. See, right now, teaching history is not just about my children because my daughter knows. We're going to make sure black kids know. We're going to make sure brown kids know. But what happens when we teach our U.S. Black History course is that white people are asking, who's going to teach this to our children? You got to help in that as well. Twice a year, my organization, and it's called Nehemiah, but it has an initiative called Justified Anger, teaches an online U.S. Black History course. It's phenomenal, taught by a key faculty from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Over 2,700 people have participated in this 9-week course. We're doing one again this fall in September. There's a link in my show notes that you can click to find out information about how you register. People take it from coast to coast. It is phenomenal. I won't get into all the details, but if you just click that link or just write info@nehemiah.org, you can get all the information to get signed up. We'll do it again in February. We have companies that have done it together, nonprofits, marketing companies, banking companies. It's amazing. If you want to understand U.S. history, not black history, we call it our U.S. Black History course because black history is U.S. history. And if you're talking about really having an honest look at where we are so that you can help be a part of where we're going, you must enroll in this class. Number 3, understand that freedom is costly. The reason we still struggle to give all people access is because oppression is lucrative. Whether it's in prisons, whether it's in illnesses, it's lucrative. Special education is lucrative. I know people need to go to prison because they've committed crimes. I know people need special education. But I'm just saying so many of the things that we don't change is because they're lucrative. And if we could find a better way to make money that didn't involve oppression, I think we're greedy enough to do it. But if easy wealth means just oppressing people, we'll continue to do it. And so understand freedom is very costly. There was a reason why it took 2.5 years from people to get the word in Texas. There's a reason why President Lincoln was afraid to free the slaves because of the economic impact of dividing the nation. It's interesting. Sometimes money and fear will speak to us more than our morals. Point 4, understand that black people want one America. Still, we want one America. I was raised to wear red, white, and blue on the Independence Day. It was important. We celebrated it. We want one America, but we prepare for the worst. We prepare to not be admitted, to not be accepted. And so in the meanwhile, we got to do us to make sure our communities are strong, that we're celebrating our culture and that we're taking care of ourselves and we're having our discussions. Sometimes we want to host the party. We want to be from America too. We're tired of people saying, well, just come over to our church, come over to our neighborhood center, come over to our park, come over to our country club. No, you come over to our stuff and learn about us. We've been coming to you forever. We've been coming up to the big house for centuries. Come to us. Humble yourselves and come and learn from us. We want to be a part of America, but America's got to change. We don't want America's handouts, particularly when we have built it. We don't want to just have America's prisons and emergency rooms. We want the prosperous life too. We want to give back to our communities as well. So understand, we're not trying to divide America. When we steal away to have our cultural celebrations, it's to protect our sanity so that we can interact in America. But America and Americans must act like they want us to be a part of the mainstream. And 5, I'm just curious, and I'm not stating whether I'm for or against reparations, but just for the sake of the discussion of reparations, just want you to have an honest conversation with yourself or maybe some trusted friends. Don't ask black people, ask other white people. What could reparations look like if it were you? Not me, but if it were you. If you found out that whenever your people had accumulated wealth, or it was lost or taken, or your children were arrested at higher rates, you died at higher rates, you lived not as long as your other counterparts. If my history were your history, what would you want? Because it's easy to sit in where you sit with your history and your memories. But if you sat where I'm sitting, what might you want or ask for? A reduction in state colleges, reduced tuition, free tuition, access to capital for starting business, great loan rates for buying homes. The idea of reparations is not just paying black people because our great grandparents were screwed over. It means evening the playing field. The term reparations sounds divisive to the untrained white ear. Oh, here they come now. Don't they have reparations? It's called welfare. Well, you know what? If we were allowed to work 400 years ago, we'd be as wealthy as you, buddy. But because we weren't, here we are. So if we were to think of reparations as evening the playing field, what would you want if you found out your family had been cheated? Would you be filing a suit with the federal government? So I'm just curious, if it were you and the systemic realities are such that there are achievement gaps or opportunity gaps, we like to call them, disparities in courts and with law enforcement and shootings and killings, what would you want, or what could reparations look like? Because that might be a real conversation. Communities are starting to wrestle with it. If we want one America, and part of America has been systemically held back for centuries, do we really do nothing and expect it to be an even playing field? Do we really just go out and expect an even playing field when no one's plowed and reseeded or sodded it so that it becomes a level field? Do we just assume swamps go away, drumlins go away, kettle moraines go away? Do we just assume that these hills just go away, mountains, foothills just disappear overnight? Or if you're going to create a plateau, you've got to dynamite something and smooth something over and plant it and let it be even. I just want you to think about that, because as a listener, I don't want you just to be entertained. I want you to be educated. And education doesn't mean that you just sit at my feet and I teach you things. It means I challenge you with thoughts and you think differently when you're not in my presence. That's enough reflection for today. I just wanted to have this time with you. It was a big weekend, so I've got big thoughts. We got a new national holiday, federal holiday, but we've got to approach it differently. And I'm hoping that Juneteenth will make us approach King Holiday differently. It's more than a day off. It's a window in to our nation. Do we just celebrate and eat good food? Do we have selective memories, or do we embrace history in order to propel us forward? I believe that a brighter future is ahead, but only if we look back. If what we look back to is obliterated, illegalized, whitewashed, in a time where whites are becoming the minority. Come on, we see the alignment of the stars. Are we going to be a part? Are you going to be a part of the solution of the problem? What side of history are you going to be on in the future? This is Dr. Alex G. I always love talking to my Black Like Me listeners. So listen, lean in, share this, repurpose it, put your comments on it, leave comments on wherever it is you download our podcast. Help us get the word out to more people. I think this is some good stuff. And I think it will help people to think differently about things that require different thinking. Have a great day, and thank you so much for being a part of Black Like Me.
Black like me. Black like.
This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Special shout out to Eli and to Jeremy, who are my engineers and my editors on this, to Don Thornton, who is my podcast manager, who makes sure that we line all of this up, to Corey Saffold, who is responsible for that exciting new jingle, that Black Like Me jingle. I'm so excited about that. And to vocals by Marcus Fleming.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Black like me.